Hey everyone.
Hey guys.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be talking about guaranteed hours. We've made a video about guaranteed hours in the past, but things have changed significantly since the beginning of the year. There's a lot less contracts that are guaranteeing hours anymore. There still are some that you can find, but they are a lot fewer. Companies are being more cautious in how many hours they're on the hook, so to speak, for a therapist being there. So we're going to talk a little bit about what guaranteed hours are and what are some things to watch out for now during COVID with facilities being a little more strict and not offering them as often. So Whitney's going to introduce us, and then I'm going to get this video shared in a couple different groups.
All right. Hey everybody, my name is Whitney Aiken.
I'm Jared Kazaza.
And we are both traveling doctors of physical therapy. Thank you guys for joining us tonight, and for those of you that will watch later on the replay. I know many of you guys tune in weekly for our weekly travel therapy videos, so welcome back if you haven't watched before. If tonight is your first time watching one of our videos, then welcome. We'd love if you'd say hello in the comments and let us know who you are. We'd like to hear whether or not you're a current travel therapist. If you're someone who's thinking about travel therapy, let us know if you're a PT, an OT, an SLP, a PTA, or a CODA, or if you're a student who's thinking about doing traveling later. We'd love to hear from you. I know a lot of you guys tune in live on Facebook when we record these every week, and I know some of you guys will listen later on the Facebook replay, on our YouTube channel, or on our podcast. So thank you however you choose to consume our videos. Hopefully tonight will be informative for you guys that are thinking about doing travel therapy, or if you're a current travel therapist. We hope to be able to give you some ideas and strategies on how to deal with guaranteed hours and trying to get the most hours possible when you are on contract, because there can be some tricky situations in terms of this. So thanks for those that are tuning in live. Hi Robin. Robin says that she's an SLP who's thinking about traveling. Thanks for joining us, Robin. Hi Kelly. Hi Allie. Hey Forrest. Hey Joey. Kelly says, I am a current travel PT. Thanks for joining tonight, Kelly. We appreciate it. Hopefully this will give you some insights, even though you are a current travel therapist, just on how you can kind of navigate this situation, because things are continuing to evolve and change with the way that it works for us travel therapists right now with COVID. So let's start by talking about kind of what are guaranteed hours and why it's important.
Yeah, so guaranteed hours are essentially the way it used to work, and sometimes still does. Facilities will offer basically a guarantee to make the offer more enticing to the traveler themselves. So, for example, it might be a 40-hour guarantee where they say, hey, if you're working for us, no matter how much work you actually have here, you're still going to get paid for 40 hours. If you work more than 40, you can make overtime, but if you work less than that, we're still going to pay you for 40. And that is kind of an insurance policy for the traveler in case there's a drop in caseload while you're on assignment or before you get to the assignment. Because say something happens, a natural disaster, something crazy, and there's a massive drop in the caseload, you've moved across the country, and then suddenly there's not enough work for you. Having that 40-hour guarantee still ensures that you're going to get paid for those hours, even if you don't have enough work to actually work for 40 hours.
Yeah, and it really depends on the travel company as well as the facility. A lot of times it has to do mostly with the facility and what the facility is able to guarantee. And over the years, this has changed. It used to be that more facilities would guarantee a full 40 hours of work. There were some in the past year or so that stopped guaranteeing as many hours, especially a lot of skilled nursing facilities were only guaranteeing about 32 hours. And a typical guarantee for like a school contract, for example, is 36 hours. Or it might be the expectation is only 36 hours and they might only guarantee 32 or so. But in the past, we had seen a lot of facilities that were guaranteeing 40. And again, it also had to do with the travel therapy company. Sometimes the travel therapy company would be able to guarantee the hours even if the facility didn't, which just meant that the travel company would eat some of the costs. So those are some important things to look out for. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit, about things to look out for an interview. But that's kind of a little bit about what a guarantee of your hours is, and that's something that's going to be presented to you on your contract when you're looking at a job. That's one of the things that you want to check off when you're going through looking at a job. The location, the pay, are hours going to be guaranteed? What are the contract dates? What's the cancellation policy? Those types of things. So guaranteed hours is one of those things you want to find out about.
Yeah, in general, guaranteed hours, if you have two contracts, and they sound identical, but one has guaranteed hours and the other one doesn't, you're always going to want to go with the one with guaranteed hours because you have just more security there.
And it's important to know that when you're looking at travel therapy contracts, typically they're always going to quote you your weekly pay based on a 40-hour work week if that job typically requires 40 hours. Again, if it's a school contract and the typical requirement is only to work 36 hours, then it would be based on that. But majority of the time, when your recruiter says, okay, this job is going to pay $1,700 a week after taxes, that is pretty much always based on assuming that you work 40 hours. So we've run into a lot of travelers who didn't know this, and then they find out, well, I only worked, 35 hours one week, so my paycheck was lower. And it's like, why was my paycheck lower?
Yeah, that's really important to know for the contracts that don't have guaranteed hours or they have less than 40-hour guarantee. Because, if you work 32 hours and they quoted you a number based on 40 and you only have a 32-hour guarantee and every week you're just getting that, then obviously you're not getting as much as you thought you'd be getting.
Mm-hmm. So really important to understand how that works. And when you're getting quoted pay, find out, just clarify with your recruiter, say, is that pay based on 40 hours? And find out if you have a 40-hour guarantee. And then you might want to run the math to see if you only have a 32 or 36-hour guarantee, what would be the minimum that I would make every week if, for example, I only got those 32 hours. So you kind of want to look at a range there and say, okay, based on the pay they're quoting me, if I get the minimum number of hours, I'll make this much. If I get the maximum numbers of hours, I'll make this much, so that you can curb your expectations, because there's nothing worse than thinking you're going to make a certain amount of money, and when you get your paycheck after a week of only working 32 hours, it's something else.
Yes.
So that's a little bit about what it is. As we mentioned before, it used to be more common to see these guaranteed hours. With COVID, we've actually seen some contracts that are guaranteeing no hours. We've seen some that are guaranteeing really, really low hours. Like, because of COVID, they just really are uncertain about their caseloads. So there's some that are guaranteeing 0 hours, or they're only guaranteeing maybe 20 or so hours. And that's been really tricky, and it's been kind of a red flag for a lot of people, because you don't necessarily know whether it's worth it for you to uproot your life and move and commit to a job if there's no guarantee that they're going to give you full hours every week.
Yeah, if you have a 20-hour guarantee or something like that, and you're quoted, say, $1,600 a week after taxes based on 40 hours a week, but then you get there and you're only working 20, then you're making $800 a week. And a lot of people can't afford to cover their travel assignment, housing, and their tax home and all that on that amount of money. So you have to be very careful accepting a contract that has either low guaranteed hours or none at all.
Yeah, because in that case, for a lot of people, it's like, why would I travel? Why wouldn't I just stay at home and work a permanent job where I could make $800 a week or whatever it is? Now, of course, there's always a possibility that even though they're only guaranteeing 20 hours or whatever, that you end up working 40, but it's a lot higher risk. So that is something that some travelers are dealing with right now, and it's making a lot of contracts look less desirable to them.
Yeah, in the past, we pretty much only advocated that people take 40-hour guarantee contracts, and that was possible up until probably last year. Around the middle of last year, PPM kind of changed things a little bit, but prior to that, pretty much everybody we mentored was getting 40-hour a week guarantees, and then now it's just not as common.
Someone asked, how likely is it to get a 40-hour guarantee now? We definitely have seen some contracts that are still guaranteeing 40 hours, but it's just a really important question to ask, because not all contracts are, and you cannot make any assumptions right now with COVID. You really need to make sure you're asking these questions. So we'll get into that next. What are some important questions to ask your recruiter during the job finding process, and then also what are some important questions to ask the manager during your phone interview? So for asking your recruiter, when they're presenting a job to you, they're going to usually say the location, the setting, the pay, and then you want to make sure to ask them, are there any guaranteed hours and how many hours are guaranteed? They'll tell you a number, and then you also want to push back a little bit and say, is this negotiable? Is it possible that...
Assuming they don't say 40.
Yeah, so if they don't say 40, if they say 32 or 36 or whatever it might be, you might have an opportunity to kind of say, is that negotiable? I would definitely consider the contract if it was this, but you have to kind of pick your battles there and just decide if that's something that's really important to you based on everything else in the contract.
Yeah, and if, say, the recruiter is not able to offer you 40-hour guarantee, it does not mean that they're trying to withhold anything from you. A lot of times, the majority of the time, that is coming straight from the facility. So If the facility itself won't offer 40-hour guarantee, then the travel company really can't do that unless they're taking a risk to pay out of pocket if something happens on that contract.
I have seen some travelers that have pushed back and tried to negotiate for a higher weekly pay because they were kind of looking at it like there's only a guarantee that I'm going to make what it is based on the 32 hours. So I really want to get that weekly take-home number higher based on 32 hours, assuming that that could be only what I get. But again, this kind of goes back to what we talked about a few weeks ago about negotiating right now with COVID. You have to pick your battles. If you're already having a hard time finding a job, it's already really competitive, you've already gotten passed over for a lot of ones you've interviewed for, maybe that's not something you do want to push for, but it's just something to take into consideration. So the next thing that you'd want to ask your recruiter is, if I'm not able to get my full 40 hours every week, will my stipends still be paid?
Yeah, there are some companies that will pay you full stipends even if you don't have a 40-hour guarantee. They're just keeping the taxable portion of your pay. And as travelers, you guys probably know, or potential travelers, the taxable portion of your pay is usually not that high. So there are some cases where you work less hours, you don't get the full taxable portion, but it's really not that big of a deal. You only miss out on a few $100s, maybe $200 or $300 a week if you work 10 hours less or something like that.
If this doesn't make sense to you, it's really important that you go back and watch a couple of our videos or read one of our articles about how a travel therapy pay package works, so you can better understand the breakdown of your pay when it's presented to you by a recruiter versus the taxable hourly rate versus your stipend rate. And this is an important question to ask your recruiter because there are some companies where they will just take off, say if you only worked 32 hours, they'll take off your hourly and they'll prorate your stipends in a negative way. Where, you know, whatever 32 out of 40 is, whatever that percentage is, if you only worked 32 out of 40 hours, they would knock off your stipends by that percentage as well. But there are certain travel companies out there that would still pay you 100% of your stipends, which is really a significant portion of your pay. So really losing the 6 hours on your hourly pay might not really affect your take-home pay that much, but it's extremely important to distinguish that with your recruiter before you sign a contract so you know what you're getting into.
Yep, and it's really important too to talk to the recruiter about how holiday pay works. Or if you do have a guaranteed hours, say you have a 40-hour guarantee and a holiday like this coming week, say the clinic is closed 2 days. Do the guaranteed hours include days when the clinic is closed for holidays? Because there are some companies that will still pay you for holidays if you have a 40-hour guarantee, and there are some companies that will not at all.
So this is another really important point here. You want to ask your recruiter for their company what is considered covered under these guaranteed hours. I would say the majority of travel therapy companies are only covering the guaranteed hours if it's the facility's fault that you have a low caseload. So that would be classified as just a low caseload guarantee. So for example, what that means is if the facility did not schedule you 40 hours of patient care, like you had a bunch of cancellations, or the caseload, if it's an inpatient facility like a skilled nursing, was just low and you only had 6 hours of work every day instead of 8 hours because there weren't enough patients to see. This is like typically 99% of the time where your guaranteed hours kicks in, because it's not your fault that there weren't 8 hours a day of patient care or 40 hours a week of patient care. So this is typically what is considered covered in guaranteed hours. What is not almost ever, never covered, is if you choose to take off time. If you are sick or you ask off a day, you don't get paid guaranteed hours because you asked off. Now the gray areas like Jared's talking about are if the facility is closed due to a holiday, if there's inclement weather like a hurricane or a snowstorm or something like that, a power outage, something like that, and it's still kind of out of your control. You would have shown up to work that day if you could have, but the facility wasn't open or you couldn't go. That's the gray area where you need to ask your recruiter, are holidays covered if the facility is closed? Do I still get my guaranteed hours? If the facility has to close due to a weather-related incident, do I still get my guaranteed hours?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We the majority of our contracts, we went through a company that would pay us for holidays and for snow days and things like that, as long as we had a 40-hour guarantee, and that was wonderful. We were actually excited to work through the holidays because we knew we'd have some days off that we'd get paid for, and so that was exciting for us. But I would say the majority of the companies are not that way.
Yeah, we really got excited about that. Sometimes we'd be like, oh yeah, we're working through Thanksgiving and Christmas, and it was an outpatient clinic.
And New Year's.
And so they'd be closed on Thanksgiving, and they'd be closed on Christmas and Christmas Eve and New Year's, and we'd be like, oh yeah, we're gonna get paid for all those days because we have our 40-hour guarantee. But we have worked for companies that's not the case. They're like, no, if the facility's closed, if it's a holiday, we're not paying you for that. So you just need to ask and kind of curb your expectations going into a contract. So if you're on contract right now and you're listening to this like, oh crap, I have no idea if I'm covered next week when my facility is closed for Thanksgiving, this would be a good question to ask your recruiter tomorrow on Monday and find out like, hey, am I covered for that or not?
Yeah, because there are situations, say you work at an outpatient clinic and they might be open on the weekends as well. There are situations where maybe the 40-hour guarantee doesn't cover holidays, but you're able to pick up a day the weekend before and the weekend after or something like that. So say the clinic is closed Thursday, Friday, but you could work Sunday and Saturday and then still get paid for 40 hours. That may or may not be something you want to do, but at least you have the option there to choose whether you want to actually work 40 hours that week or not.
Yeah, so we're going to get into that in a few minutes when we talk about some strategies in terms of guaranteed hours. But these are just some questions that we're talking about asking up front before you sign a contract. So to recap, important to ask your recruiter for the contract you're potentially interviewing for. Are the hours guaranteed and how many hours are guaranteed? Will my stipend still be paid if I get less than 40 hours? Based on the number of hours that are guaranteed, and what's covered on my hourly guarantee? Are holidays covered, inclement weather, and that sort of thing. Now, the next step would be if you get an interview with a facility, what are some questions that you might ask the company, the manager, or whoever it is that interviews you, to try to get a feel for whether or not you're going to be able to get a good amount of hours at this contract coming up. So, some things that you would want to ask during your phone interview. You would want to find out what has their caseload been like. And you would ask this just normally during your interview when you're asking how many patients am I going to see a day? And with COVID, I think it's especially important right now for you to say, hey, what's your caseload been like at the facility? Is it likely that I'm going to get 40 hours every week?
Yeah, that's really important. Asking questions about are you hiring anybody new soon, because say they're in the process of interviewing people and you're starting and they hire someone, then that might significantly impact the number of hours that you get. So yeah, things like, am I going to get 40 hours? Is that normally the person that was in this position, or whose place I'm taking, were they normally getting 40 hours? Is there a chance I might not? Because that might impact your decision if you're not getting a guarantee there.
Yeah, so if you already know up front that there's been, maybe the recruiter says this contract is only offering a 20-hour guarantee or a 32-hour guarantee, and then the person who's interviewing with you is kind of wishy-washy about their caseload. If they're like, yeah, we haven't really had that many patients lately, and we'll see, and all this kind of thing, that's kind of a red flag. If you're going to be significantly uprooting your life to travel to this contract, say it's in a different state, it's several hours away, maybe you have to fly there, maybe it's a several day drive. If it's a really, really big monetary and time commitment for you, and the person on the phone sounds wishy-washy about whether or not you're likely to work 40 hours, that's a red flag. You might not want to take that job. Yep. Now, if you're really desperate for a job and it's a job not that far from you and you're like, you know what, I'm willing to take it even knowing I might only get 20 hours, okay, but at least you will have asked that question and you will have a better idea of what their caseload is like. So that's one thing that you'd want to ask. What's the caseload look like?
Real quick before we get to the next one, if you guys could like this video, leave us a comment. I saw Nick Foy. Nick Foy is crazy. He said that he is simultaneously killing Japanese demons while watching this. So I hope he's playing a video game, but I'm not sure.
I didn't fully read that comment, but I sort of thought he meant like he was like killing some Japanese food, like he was eating it, but I'm not really sure exactly what's happening. So anyway, if you guys are getting any value out of this video, if you're learning anything, please hit the like button, hit the heart button. If you're listening later on the podcast or YouTube, please remember to subscribe. We really appreciate it. And actually on Facebook Live, you can subscribe too. You can get notified when we go live each week. All right, so talking about what to ask the manager or the person who's interviewing you on the phone. So you will have asked, what's the caseload like? Is it likely I'm going to work 40 hours every week? You also want to know if you're going into some holidays, especially towards the end of the year where there's a ton of holidays back to back, if it's expected that you would work on holidays. So if you know for a fact your contract is going to run through some holidays, find out if the facility is open on those holidays and if you would be expected to work or if you would not be expected to work.
Yeah, and I guess we should also mention there, when you're talking to your recruiter, talk to them about holiday pay. And that might impact whether you're working holidays or not at the facility, because some companies will pay you time and a half for holidays and some companies won't. And that might, the facility might have to pay the travel company more money for you to work a holiday, in which case they may not want you there. So definitely something to talk to both the recruiter and the hiring manager about. How are holidays handled? Am I expected to work them? If I am working them, do I get time and a half? And that's what you ask the recruiter.
Yep. So then if the person says, no, we won't have you work those days, that would probably be a good opportunity to follow up with your recruiter and say, hey, my contract is going to be running through these holidays, and they said that either the facility would be closed or I would not be required to work those days. How's my pay going to work that week? And again, we'll get into some strategies to work around that here in a minute. You would also want to talk about on your contract if your normal hours are going to be Monday through Friday, and say that they are typically wanting you to work Monday through Friday. You would also want to find out, is the facility open other days? Now, if it's a skilled nursing facility or a hospital, you can reasonably know that they are open on Saturdays and Sundays, but you want to find out if you're typically expected to work Saturdays or Sundays, or if it would be something that they would ever spring on you. For example, like Jared said, sometimes if they don't want you to work the holiday, they might ask you to work a different day that week to make up for it. Usually what happens is, if that is an option, your company or the facility will make you do that, or they won't pay you.
Yes.
Because the way they look at it is, okay, yes, typically you work Monday through Friday, but if there's a holiday on a Thursday and the facility doesn't want to pay you holiday pay, they might either say, we can't pay you for that day, and therefore you're only going to get paid for 32 hours that week, or it's going to be required of you to make up that day on the Sunday before or the Saturday after, or else we're not going to pay you the guaranteed hours because there was an option for you to do something different.
Yeah, so that's kind of frustrating if you're in that situation. We've been in that situation before, where we're all excited about having the holiday off, and then it turns out that we have to work the next weekend. We thought we were going to get paid for it, but it's better than not getting paid or not knowing about it. So go into it asking all the right questions.
Yeah, so that, just realize that could sometimes be an expectation if it is a facility that is open on Saturdays and Sundays as well. But sometimes that can work in your favor. We've had it happen before where we needed to request a day off during the week and we still wanted to be able to get our hours. So if it was a facility where you could either work maybe like a 10-hour day a couple of days that week, because they're open early and late to make up your hours, or we could say, hey, I really need Wednesday off because I have a doctor's appointment, but could I work Saturday to make it up so I can get all my hours? Because remember, if you request off, you don't get paid for that. That's not included in guaranteed hours.
Yep.
So it can work to your advantage or it can work to your disadvantage, but it's just something to keep in mind and some good questions to ask during your interview to find out what the schedule is going to look like, and so there's nothing sprung on you later and have you be really upset about it because it's going to affect your pay at the end of the week.
Yeah, some of that might be confusing. Hopefully you guys understand that. If not, feel free to ask in the comments. We'll try to clarify.
Yep. Now, something else I want to bring up as far as caseload, guaranteed hours, and COVID. During your interview, you would want to find out if this is a standalone facility where you're always going to be at one building, or if they have other buildings and other facilities that they're going to sometimes want you to float to. We've been hearing a lot more of this, where facilities are associated with other buildings in the area. Maybe it's like 2 hospitals that are rural hospitals within like an hour of each other, a couple of skilled nursing facilities that are close to each other, or a couple of outpatient clinics that are in a chain. Sometimes if they don't have a strong caseload at one of their buildings, they will ask you to float to another building in order to get your hours. And there are times where your contract will be threatened because they just find out that they don't have enough of a caseload for you at one building. So they'll kind of sometimes give you an ultimatum where they're like, look, we don't really have enough hours for you just at this one building, so we can have you float to get your hours over here, or we might just have to end your contract because we don't have enough work. So it would be good to know going into this if they have any sister facilities or sister buildings, and ask if you're going to typically always be at the same building or if you'd sometimes be asked to float. And this can be kind of frustrating and annoying. We had an instance where we had no idea, that was not on our radar at all, where we thought we would ever go to a different location, and then sort of mid-contract we kind of got asked to go help with this other location, and we agreed. I agreed actually. Jared ended up staying at the main facility, and I agreed to go help at this other location, I thought temporarily just for 1 week. And what happened was, when I gave an inch, they took a mile. And they kept asking me over and over and over and over again to go back to this place. And when I finally said, look, I didn't agree to this in my contract. I was trying to help you out for a week. No, I'm not going there anymore. They started to get kind of nasty and say, well, we don't have enough hours for both of you at the one building anymore. So if you can't do this, then we're just going to end your contract.
Yeah, this actually happened to us twice. There was a different incident where this facility we worked at, they had 4 different clinics. And they had a traveler that was supposed to be starting at one of the clinics. His license got delayed. He wasn't able to start. And they pulled me from one of the clinics and had me drive 45 minutes for 2 weeks to another clinic to work that caseload. And that was a frustrating time.
Yeah, and sometimes when you're in the situation, you really just feel bad and you want to help them and you want to give in, but it might just be better to curb your expectations going in to find out if that's something that is a potential possibility, because when you get caught up in that situation, I'm going to tell you, you really feel pressured to do it because you feel like your contract is in jeopardy if you don't. So even though you might say, like, I'm going to put my foot down, I'm not going to do that, you might find that when push comes to shove, you really don't want to lose your contract, so you end up doing it. So we just want you to be aware that is something that happens sometimes. So especially with COVID going on, especially with places like with lower caseloads, I think this is an important interview question to ask if there are sister facilities in the area and if you would ever be expected to float.
Yeah.
And how far away are they?
Very good question, and very often overlooked.
Because if you find out that that's the case, and maybe you're like, you know what, it's okay, I'd be willing to do it, but if I'm going to do it, maybe they need to change the pay a little bit, then you would want to find that out up front and talk to your recruiter about it if it's going to be really a deal breaker for you. And maybe that's something where you're like, if I got a little higher pay to sweeten the deal, then I would do it, but if not, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, and there's also other ways that you can negotiate that situation. As long as you do it up front, things like maybe getting paid for mileage or maybe getting paid for the drive time, so being on the clock for the drive. I actually had an assignment where they paid me basically to drive back and forth because it was farther than I was supposed to go, and that was pretty awesome. So I was just getting paid to drive 45 minutes.
Yeah, so in some instances it could be really bad, it could really hurt you and cause a lot of frustration. In other instances, if there's just not enough work and you really, really want to hang on to your contract and not have it cut, then you might find yourself willing to do it just so you can keep your contract. But something to keep in mind there. So I want to talk a little bit more about strategies in terms of guaranteeing your hours and making sure you get all kinds of hours, all of your hours.
All kinds of hours.
All kinds of hours. I don't know what I'm saying. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the strategy of shifting your work schedule throughout Monday through Friday if it became an issue to try to get hours. I also want to mention that when you have a 40-hour guarantee, you might sometimes run into situations where it's really vague. So we run into this a lot because I'd say 99% of our contracts always had a 40-hour guarantee. And Jared's going to know what I'm talking about when I start talking about it. So you remember how sometimes it would be kind of like, my work is done for the day. I don't have any patients left for the day. Should I just leave or do I stay? Yeah,
so if you do have a 40-hour guarantee, this does happen quite often. There are situations, the right thing to do is to, if you don't have a large enough caseload, say you have 36 hours, you're going to be done 4 hours early, you're going to get paid for 40, so you have a 40-hour guarantee. The right thing to do is go to the manager and say, hey, is there anything that I can help with during this time? That's not the fun thing to do, though. The fun thing to do is to leave early. So you're in this kind of a vague situation where you really should at least offer to help out the clinic if you know you're going to get paid for these hours, like at least do something, sweep, clean, something like that. But there are situations where you can probably get away with leaving early, and that's usually what I chose to do.
Yeah, so it can be super vague if you have that 40-hour guarantee, and we've talked to many other travelers where this happens, where they're guaranteeing 40, but they know well and full that they don't have 40 hours of patient care to see. So they're just kind of hanging out, and maybe they leave early, and then at the end of the week they still just put on their timesheet 40, or just mark the little box that says 40-hour guarantee, and they still get paid for it even though they're really only in the building for like 35 hours. Most of the time that's fine, but yeah, if you really want to be a good employee, a good traveler, you should probably let your manager know, hey, you know, what would you like me to do during this extra time? I know I'm supposed to be here till 5 today, but all my patients were done at 3. Is there anything I can help you with? So like Jared's like cleaning. Sometimes they might want you to help with some, like I've definitely helped with front desk tasks before. I helped with filing papers and organizing the office before, cleaning. Depending on the facility, you might have some discharges that you could work on, like some non-visit discharges. So find out, you know, from your manager. It's up to you. You know, you can just outright ask, or you can find things to keep yourself busy for a little while just to kind of milk the clock until the end of your workday. But most of the time you can get away with leaving a little early and still just writing 40 hours guarantee on your paper at the end of the week. But I will say there's also some other options. Occasionally they'll be okay with you maybe working on some continuing ed at the end of your day, or some facilities will have required modules that they want you to do, like compliance modules. We have this right now at our PRN job, so they assign us modules every month to do compliance stuff. They're transitioning to a new EMR, so they have some videos for us to do for that, HIPAA, various things like that. So if you do have a travel therapy contract that requires those things, that might be a good time when you have downtime, if you have a 40-hour guarantee, to do those things while you're on the clock. So just some ideas there, but you guys may find that you run into that every now and then. It's kind of nice when that happens instead of the opposite, when you're working way more than 40 and only getting paid for 40.
Yep.
But just some things to think about there. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap up here as far as the summary goes. But let's go through some comments and some questions before we wrap up. I know a lot of you guys asked questions throughout. If you're watching now or later and you have questions for us about guaranteed hours, feel free to leave it in the comments and we'll read them now, and then I'll kind of summarize at the end.
So Forrest said he's excited about guaranteed hours, but he wants to hear about Bitcoin. Yeah, so I've been talking a lot about Bitcoin. I probably will talk more about it. I'm actually in the process of writing an article about why I changed my opinion on Bitcoin, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and in case you guys are wondering, Jared's been talking about it on our Healthcare Travelers on Fire group. So if you're interested in learning more about like finances and being a financially savvy traveler, feel free to join our Healthcare Travelers on Fire group, where Jared will post about different things, not necessarily travel related, but more like finance related.
Yep.
Robin says, I have a full-time job making good money with good benefits, but not what I was making at a private practice. I want to increase my pay and travel.
Yeah.
That's great.
You definitely can do that. The benefits, depending on what you mean by benefits, I mean, health insurance can be pretty good for travelers, but you miss out on things like sick pay, vacation time, which can be pretty valuable at full-time jobs. So you have to kind of decide if the higher pay is worth missing out on those benefits. And right now, of course, there's some more uncertainty with travel, so that's another consideration.
All right. Hey, Nick. Thanks for joining. Nick says, my contract in Pulaski, Virginia pays us for holidays, 40-hour guarantee. Either if you want to take, oh, he said, do either of you want to take over when I leave in January? So that's, Pulaski is about an hour from us. So that's really great, Nick, that they're guaranteeing your hours even through the holidays. That's definitely a cushy job to have.
Sounds like a good contract. I would like to do that.
All right. Hi, Nick. Nick says, not food demons, just regular Japanese demons, whatever that means. Okay, Nick says, I had a year-long contract in Alaska where it got wishy-washy with my 40 hours dropping down to 25.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely can happen. We've run into some tricky situations there, so.
Yeah, that's an important thing to mention too. Sometimes on extensions, companies will try to change the contract, things like guaranteed hours. They might decrease it if, you haven't had the full caseload and, you've been getting paid for it. They don't want to do that, so they might try to change things. So watch that in extensions. Make sure everything is still the same, or that you're comfortable with the changes.
Yeah, make sure you know what you're getting into, because honestly, there are some people who might be okay with, shorter hours, and that's fine, but you really need to know what you're getting into and need to know what your pay really and truly is going to be every week so that you don't have any unexpected negative surprises when you get your first paycheck. Hey Forrest, hey Nick. Again, if you guys have any other questions, we're going to read through them. Rosa says, good evening guys, thanks for this topic. You're welcome, Rosa. Thank you for watching. Hi Jeff, hi Armand, hi Joey. So Joey asked earlier at the beginning of the video when we were talking about some of the current guarantees being really low. He said, so it's essentially PRN, kinda.
I would say more like part-time, because usually in these situations you're going to have certain days that you're working consistently. So it's not like, oh, we'll call you if we need you. It's more like 32 hours you're working Monday through Thursday and you have Friday off, that kind of thing usually.
But it's a good point because there's so many facilities across the country that really need somebody, but they just don't necessarily have the caseload to support a normal 40-hour traveler. So a lot of them just abstained from listing a listing at all, which is why we saw such a huge drop in jobs. Some of them, went out on a limb and were like, hey, we do need somebody, but we can't necessarily say how much it's gonna be. So they just put it out there to dangle it to see if anybody was interested, even though it was only 20 hours or 0-hour guarantee.
Yeah.
And in a lot of instances, we had some of our recruiters say, hey, this facility needs somebody, but they're only guaranteeing 20 hours. So it really and truly might only be appropriate for someone who's nearby, who's not going to have to travel and move to take that job because of the high risk of only getting 20 hours, in which case they were only advertising that job to local travelers.
Yeah, and I do not think that this reduction in guaranteed hours is going to be a permanent thing. It's just right now, like we've talked about multiple times, the cards are kind of in the hands of the facilities because they have a ton of applicants for their jobs. Whereas for the past 4 years prior to PDPM, PDGM, and COVID, the cards were really in the hands of the travelers. So there were some facilities out there that really needed someone and they weren't getting many applicants. So they're trying to make it more desirable by offering things like guaranteed hours and higher pay and those kind of things that they can entice travelers in.
Yep. All right, so let's see if there's any other questions before we wrap up. I think we addressed Nikki's question earlier.
Hey, Kelsey.
Okay, let's scroll back, see if there's any new questions before we wrap up here. All right, guys, again, if you have any questions later, please feel free to leave them in the comments. We do go back and look at them later on the Facebook Live feed, even after the video ends. But just to kind of wrap up, guaranteed hours vary highly. As we mentioned, it used to be a lot more common to get a full 40-hour guarantee. We do hope that it'll get back to that in the future, but right now it's been just less likely to see that overall. It really varies based on each situation. It's really important that you guys find out up front to know what you're getting into. We just hate to hear when a traveler uproots their whole life, invests a lot of time and money to get housing set up, move somewhere only to find out it wasn't what they expected. They're not getting enough hours, or not getting enough pay. And there's nothing worse than doing all that and having the stress of being a traveler without getting compensated for it.
Yeah, and really about 95% of the time that can be mitigated with asking the right questions and going in with all of the bases covered. That's when you hear the horror stories about travel, is people that don't really ask all the questions, don't know what they're doing. They move across the country, they don't have a good experience, and then they hate it. And those are the people that talk very negatively about travel.
And if you do find yourself in a situation where you're already in a contract and there is a drastic change in your caseload and they're threatening to maybe have to end your contract, see if there's any way that you can work it out with the facility to get creative. It all depends on what you're willing to do to have to stay there. If you're willing to say, you know what if I could reduce the hourly guarantee to this? I'd be willing to stay here and work here with only a 32-hour guarantee if you still need me. Or I'd be willing to maybe float to one of your nearby facilities to make it work because I really want to save this contract, versus if they're trying to push you into those things and it's not at all what you want and you know that you would be better off ending that contract and finding something better, then go with that, go with your gut and talk to your recruiter about it if it's not what you initially signed up for. Just sometimes you have to be a little bit flexible and get creative, especially if you don't want to lose the job. But if you are really over the job, you're over all the crap that they're asking you to do that's outside of, what you really signed up for. I hate hearing that. I think a few weeks ago sparked my idea for this topic because I saw someone say, hey, It's not what I signed up for. What am I obligated to do? And it's like, you're not obligated to do anything. If they are suddenly changing the terms of the contract on you and saying, well, we really need you to come in on Saturday, or we really need you to float to this other building, and you're not okay with that, and you have a better opportunity on the horizon, then use your 2-week notice or your 30-day notice or whatever it is and get out of the contract and go somewhere else.
Yep.
So just some things to keep in mind there. Guaranteed hours have been just a little bit different this year with COVID, like with everything else. So we really hope that 2021 will show us going back to more normal contracts, more normal guaranteed hours, less
Higher
of
pay, hopefully.
higher pay, less of this having to bend over backwards and float between facilities and all that kind of stuff. But we just want to let you guys know some things to think about and be aware of as you're getting into contracts right now.
Yep. One more time, if you guys got value from this, please like the video, comment, let us know that you enjoyed it. Let us know any future topics you want us to cover. We are always looking for new things to talk about.
Absolutely. Well, we will see you next week, and I hope you have a great week.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.